Trump administration officials held 2 classified briefings yesterday on last week's drone strike that killed General Soleimani, and lawmakers came away with vastly different conclusions. Republican Senator Marco Rubio tweeted, "National security officials gave a compelling briefing to senators just now.
Yay,
they answered
team.
Every important question.
We love Donald."
Anyone who walks out and says they aren't convinced action against Soleimani was justified is either never going to be convinced or just oppose everything Trump does.
Wow.
We can decide into which of Rubio's 2 categories Republican Senators Mike Lee of Utah and Rand Paul of Kentucky fall.
Probably the worst briefing I've seen, at least on a military issue, in the 9 years I've served in the United States Senate. One of the messages we received from the briefers was, do not debate, do not discuss the issue of the appropriateness of further military intervention against Iran. And that if you do, you'll be emboldening Iran. I find it insulting and I find it demeaning to the Constitution of the United States, to which we've all sworn an oath. And they had to leave after 75 minutes while they're in the process of telling us that we need to be good little boys and girls and run along and not debate this in public. I find that absolutely insane. I walked into that briefing undecided as to whether to support the resolution under the War Powers Act introduced by Senator Kaine. That briefing is what changed my mind. That briefing is what brought me on board, together with the amendments that Senator Kaine has agreed to make. I'm now going to support it.
I think they're overreacting, quite frankly. Go debate all you want to. I'm going to debate you. Trust me, I'm going to let people know that at this moment in time, to play this game with a War Powers Act, which I think is unconstitutional, is that whether you mean to or not, you're empowering the enemy.
You said you're empowering the enemy.
That is fundamentally antithetical to the Constitution. Look, I love Lindsey Graham. He's a fantastic guy. We work closely together on a lot of issues. He's dead wrong insofar as he's suggesting that this is playing a game. Mr. Graham, the Constitution of the United States is not a game.
You know, Willie Geist, only in the age of Trump would actually reading the Constitution and believing that Article 1 says what Article 1 says. Only in Donald Trump's Washington would a Republican senator call that empowering the enemy. Lindsey Graham's word about a fellow Republican saying that because he wanted to debate a strike, an airstrike, wanted to debate intel. Lindsey called that empowering the enemy, and yet it's Lindsey Graham and Donald Trump and the entire Republican Party who's been castigating and slandering the men and women of the FBI, CIA, NSA, you name it, every intel agency across Washington, D.C. It's hard to say that this is Lindsey Graham's most shameful performance, but I would say that accusing Mike Lee of empowering the Iranians because you want to actually defend the Constitution of the United States, that's up there.
Well, remember, this is the same day that Lindsey Graham said the president's speech was better than Reagan's tear down this wall speech. So that's where Lindsey Graham was yesterday in defending the president. But Jeffrey Goldberg, the picture painted by not just Mike Lee, but Rand Paul and some others, was of a briefing from Pompeo and Gina Haspel and Secretary Esper, where for 75 minutes they said, here's what happened. This is not open for debate. We don't need you out in front of TV cameras arguing with us about this. As Mike Lee put it, Senator Lee said, go be good little girls and boys and get out there and defend the president. Effectively is how he summarized it. But every once in a while, we do get a glimmer from a Republican in Congress, a principled glimmer of someone who says, no, I'm not going to just rally behind the president. I'm not going to reflexively defend him when I come out. When I see something wrong and something that I think violates the spirit of the Constitution and the way our government is supposed to run, I'm going to say something.
Well, you know, what's one of the things that surprised me yesterday about that was that, senators have healthy egos. I mean, everybody in the Senate believes that he or she should be president. We know that. Right. When you talk down, one of the things that they hate the most is being talked down to. It's surprising that more people didn't come out of that briefing that Mike Lee had that reaction to and come out and say, look, You can't. You administration bureaucrats cannot tell elected representatives of the American people what to talk about and what not to talk about. It's very surprising. I mean, it goes to the larger theme of discipline within the Republican ranks. Right. They've got 95% of that party in total lockstep. The other interesting angle of this, if you want to step back into history, and it doesn't really matter if you supported the Iraq War or didn't support the Iraq War when you think about it in this context, but we've seen plenty of instances in which legislators have, after the fact, regretted not asking hard questions. They might have come out. Again, they might have come out on the side of saying, well, you know what, this is a justified military action in Iraq or elsewhere. But the idea that we never learn from previous mistakes, and we never see senators sort of saying, you know what, my job is actually to pressure test what this administration is selling me. That's kind of astonishing.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.